It gives me immense pleasure to welcome this group of heritage lovers through the YouTube platform. I also welcome with great joy the star heritage speaker V. Sriram. He delivered 34 lectures under the auspices of the 18-year South India Heritage Program, which concluded last year. He also gave 2 YouTube lectures last December. The topic for today's lecture is Music and Dance in and around Kapaliswarar Temple, Mylapore. Sriram says he has a strong attachment to the temple. His first visit must have been when he was 2 or 3 years old. He has studied an abundance of material on the temple, publications, tevarams, poems, Carnatic music. He has held intense discussions on the temple with music stalwart S. Rajam. So the topic selected itself, says Sriram. Musical accompaniment for today's lecture will be provided by the talented singer and composer Bharat Sundar. He is known as much for a unique voice as for his skill in blending tradition with creativity. V. Sriram says Bharat Sundar's songs beautifully convey the spirit of the Kapaliswarar temple. V. Sriram is one of Chennai's icons and a busy one. He describes himself on Twitter as part entrepreneur, part historian, part writer, part crackpot. He manages to cram many events and activities into his 24-hour day. He is the editor of Madras Musings and a secretary of the Music Academy. He has conducted scores of heritage walks in Chennai and in several cities of Tamil Nadu. He is the author of 22 books. Of these, he initiated some half a dozen books himself. These included his very first book, Carnatic Summer, and the books on Samangudi Srivasayar, Bangalore Nagaratnama, Music Academy, Fort St. George, and his most recent book, A Biography of Chennai. The other 16 books, many of them about the corporate world, were commissioned. This is Sriram's Biography of Chennai. It is a masterpiece and is an almost certain bestseller. He was destined to write it. He examines Chennai's record as the first city of modern India, a city of flair, color and creativity. In the book, Sriram discusses the structures and systems built in Chennai by ancient rulers such as the Cholas. He takes readers through Chennai's years of occupation by the Portuguese, the Dutch and the British, as well as the Dravidian politics of recent years. He delves into the city's delectable food, culture, music, dance and cinema. He looks at the city as a powerhouse of education, Medicare, heavy engineering, automobiles, leather goods and software. In short, everything that makes Chennai pulsate with life, energy and opportunities. If the Chennai book is a treasure of information, Sriram delights us through the audiovisual media as well. He runs his own YouTube channel on which he uploads about 1 program a week. Some 20 programs have come up so far during the past year. These include programs on the history of the Marina Beach, a 105-year-old book on South India, the railway history of Chennai, Madras Bhashai, the Armenian connection to Chennai and so on. This project came into being through the initiative of Brand Avatar, an event management company. Their people were thrilled at a program Sriram did for them. They asked him to do for them a weekly Tamil program about Madras, its history and culture. Sriram readily agreed. He also decided to upload programs in English on YouTube. Sriram says the Tamil programs are much more popular than the English. They reach a lot of people who don't usually attend his events. Thus, Sriram's heritage affair with the people of Madras, high and humble, is hot as ever. thanks to Mr. Artichari, Chennai lovers and heritage lovers will be able to view today's program on YouTube for the next 5 days. Happy viewing.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for logging in this morning to listen to this presentation on the music and dance of the Kapaliswarar temple. Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Artichari for notwithstanding COVID, still continuing with these recordings and practically insisting that they should be done year after year. It certainly encouraged me to get going with these presentations, and I must say that I enjoyed the process of putting them together greatly. I also thank Mr. S.R. Madhu, who has been introducing me ever since the first presentation I made in the Tag Center in 2002, if I am not mistaken. And that, I think, is a record by itself. Thank you very much, Mr. Madhu. And I also thank Bharat Sundar for having readily agreed to come and sing the excerpts of the various musical pieces that are associated with the history of the Kapaliswarar temple. Bharat is one of my favorite musicians, and I consider it a great privilege that he is here on stage to sing these compositions. The Kapaliswarar temple itself, as Mr. Madhu mentioned in his introduction, is one that is very dear to me. As he also mentioned, I must have been 2 or 3, of which I have no memory of being taken there, but I assume that I must have been 2 or 3, because even by the time I was 5, I very, very clearly remember being woken up at 12 o'clock in the middle of the night to say that the rickshaw had come and my grandmother and me setting out to see the Rishabha Vahanam festival of the Kapaliswarar temple. I also recollect going with my grandmother to distribute Laksha Manjal and Laksha Mallipu in the Kapaliswarar temple, which would involve her seating herself very regally in one of the mandapams and then sending us all minions out to fetch mammies, diverse mammies, to come and see her. And then mammies of whom we had no idea who they were, what they were doing. But all we had to do was to go and say, Mami, enga party Laksha Manjal Kudkara Vango. And then the mammies would make a cue to grandmother, who would be holding a levy like Queen Victoria. And they would then hold out their pallu, and then she would place the manjal or the mallipu in it, and then the mammies would go away. This was a ritual that used to go on for several years, as far as I can remember. But it was during that time that I guess that the seeds of my fascination for this particular temple were laid, and that seed has only grown into a larger and larger tree as the years have gone by. Certainly, I am at my happiest when I go to visit the Kapaliswarar temple and when I say my prayers over there. This temple, as we all know, is one of the most historic of the South Indian shrines possible. It has existed from a very ancient time indeed. We also know that the temple where it stands today is not where it was originally, and that it has shifted over time for various reasons, which we will explore briefly when we go through this presentation. I must also tell you up front that this is not a presentation on the history of the Kapaliswarar temple. So there will be, I will assume that several aspects of the history are known, or I will just pass through them briefly because the focus is more on the music and the dance, and by virtue of the music and the dance, on the ancient Tamil poetry that this temple was endowed with by several great composers, seers and savants. Perhaps the first of whom we have a record is the arrival of Jnana Sambandar. Sambandar, who belonged to the 6th and 7th centuries, the child who was given sacred milk by the goddess on the temple tanks at Sirgari, and at whose poetic prowess Shankara, none other than Adi Shankara himself, marvels in his Saundarya Lahari, where he says, Tavasthanyam manye dharani dharakanye dayavataha paya paravaraha parivahati saraswatamiva dayavatya dattam dravida shishu aswadya tavayat kavinam praudanam ajani kamaniya kavaita. It is because of the feat of drinking the divine milk from your breasts that this child, this Dravida Shishu, this child who was born in southern India, became a great poet and also remained eternally young. As we know, Samanda attained Mukti at a very early age. And Shankara himself marvels at what Samandar was capable of. So Samandar comes sometime during his wanderings in South India, he comes to this particular location of Mylapore. At that time, Shivanesan Chettiar was a very rich merchant who lived over here, and his daughter was Poompavai. Poompavai used to go every day in the morning and pluck flowers for the temple, and one day when she was doing that, a snake bit her and she died. She was cremated, the ashes were kept faithfully preserved, hoping that Samandar would one day come and revive the dead woman. Samandar arrives and composes what is today known as the Poompavai Padigam. Spread over 10 stanzas, it describes one festival in each of those stanzas. And what is such a marvel is that if Samandar sang of it in the 6th and the 7th centuries, those festivals are followed even today in the Kapaliswarar temple. The temple is not where Samandar came and sang of it. The temple itself has shifted. Lots of changes have happened over the years, but in a remarkable continuity of tradition. We just need to read the Poompavai Padigam and we need to go back to the temple, and we find that everything that he described in his time still continues. That, I think, is really a cause for great wonder. So Samandar's Poompavai Padigam begins with Mattitta Punnayin Kanal, Madamailai, Kattittam Kondan, Kapalicharam Amarndan, Uttitta Panbin, Uruttira Palganattarku, Attittal Kanade, Podio Poompavai. In this fragrant grove of Punnai trees, Kapali is seated, and there you find these beautiful damsels of Mailai coming and feeding the devotees of Shiva. O Poompavai, you have gone away without witnessing all this. And so it keeps going down. Every stanza describes a festival, and at the end of every line, it laments that Poompavai has gone away without seeing it. At the end of the 10th verse, just as a baby emerges from the womb of the mother, it is said that Poompavai emerged from the pot. And Shivanesan Chettiar was so overjoyed that he offered Poompavai in marriage to Samandar. But Samandar said that that cannot be. I have given birth to this girl, and therefore she is like my daughter. Samandar then goes away on his visits to various other temples. Poompavai dedicates herself to the Kapaliswarar temple and remains there for the rest of her life. Interestingly, inscriptions with the name Poompavai have been discovered at various places in and around Chennai, including the Thiruvallikeni temple tank. So obviously the tradition of Poompavai is a very old one indeed. On the temple Gopuram itself, we see the legend of Poompavai having been described in the form of a frieze which is there. We will now have Bharat Sundar sing the first set of those 10 verses of the Poompavai Padigam. Over to you, Bharat.
Mattitta Punnayanka Mattitta Punnayankanal Madamailai Kattittam Kondan Mattitta Punnayankanal Madamailai Kattittam Kondan Madamailai Kattittam Kondan Kapalicharam Amarndan Kapalicharam Kapalicharam Amarndan Mattitta Punnayankanal Madamailai Kattittam Kondan Kapalicharam Amarndan ஒட்டிட்ட பண்பின் உருத்திர பல்கணத்தார் ஒட்டிட்ட பண்பின் உருத்திர பல்கணத்தார் கட்டிட்டல் காணாதே போதியோ பூம்பாவாய் ஒட்டிட்ட பண்பின் உருத்திர பல்கணத்தார் கட்டிட்டல் காணாதே 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 போதியோ பூம்பாவாய் பூம்பாவாய்.
Samandar, having come to the Kapaliswarar temple and having composed a Tevaram verse over there or a Padigam there, it automatically becomes one of the Padal Petrasthalam. That is one of the exalted Shiva temples, 250 odd, where the Tevara mover, which is basically Appar, Sundarar and Samandar, they have come and they have left behind their verses. The Periya Puranam, which is essentially a 12th century documentation on the lives of the 63 great followers of Shiva, also known as the Aruvatti mover, also records that Appar came to Mylapore as well, but we do not have any verse of his which is dedicated to this temple. But we know that Appar in his Thirukkaappu Thiruthandagam, which is composed at Thiruveerattanam, refers to Mylapore. And in that particular line, Mylapil Maninathar Manniyetum, he refers to this place as Mylapil, which is basically a place which is resounding to the cries of the peacock. And that gives you an idea as to how this place originally must have got its name. It must have been a grove where plenty of peacocks existed. And we just need to see some of the other places associated with Shiva and with animals, like for instance Aduthurai, Thiruvavaduturai, Kurangaduturai, so many other places like this. And we know that in all these places, animals and birds worshipped Shiva and finally attained mukti. And therefore, Mylapore itself must have been a great sacred grove of peacocks. I referred to the Periya Puranam, and I also mentioned to you that the Periya Puranam is a compilation of the lives of the 63 great followers of Shiva. One among them is Vayilar Nayanar. If Kapaliswarar temple attains an exalted status because Samandar sang a Tevaram here, it rises even higher because Mailai is the birthplace of one of the 63 followers of Shiva. And that follower is Vayilar Nayanar, who also has a sanctum to himself inside this shrine. Let us see what the Periya Puranam has to say about Mylapore and about Vayilar Nayanar in the form of verse. The Periya Puranam has just a set of 10 verses on Vayilar Nayanar. Unlike what it has to say about Samandar or Appar or any of those great saints of whom we know a lot, just 10 verses and 1 page, that's about it. But what is very interesting is that those pages have a lot to speak about Mylapore. In fact, they have less to say about the Nayanmar and more about the town itself where he lived. So, சொல் விளங்கு சீர் தொண்டை நன் நாட்டிடை மல்லல் நீடிய வாய்மை வளம்பதி பல் பெருங்குடி நீடு பரம்பரை செல்வம் மல்கு திருமயிலாப்புரி. This Mylapore, which is praised in literature and in poetry, where several prosperous clans have lived for several generations with a lot of wealth endowed to them, that Mylapore. And then some portions of this description, you realize that Mylapore hasn't changed all that much. வீதி எங்கும் விழா அணி காளையர் தூதி எங்கு கரும்பணி தோகையர் ஓதி எங்கும் ஒழியா அணிநிதி பூதி எங்கும் புனைமணி மாடங்கள். Everywhere tall buildings, buildings of many floors. And then festive all the time, and in this young men wandering about and beautiful women also wandering about, and the bees that flit among the flowers that these women are wearing in their hair are almost as though they are messengers from those young men to these beautiful women. And in the midst of all this hustle and bustle, you realize that Sekirar is such a great author that he creates all this hustle and bustle only as a contrast to what he is now going to say about Vayilar Nayanar. So the first 6 verses are all chaos, confusion, noise, music, dance, everything that is happening, prosperity. And then suddenly you come to Vayilar Nayanar, who is completely uninvolved in all of this. மறவாமையான் அமைத்த மனக்கோயில் உள்ளுறுத்தி உறவாதி தனையுணரும் ஒளிவிளக்கு சுடரேற்றி இரவாத ஆனந்தம் எனும் திருமஞ்சனமாட்டி அரவாணர்க்கு அன்பெனும் அமுதை அர்ச்சனை செய்வார். What did he do? He built a temple for Shiva. And what kind of a temple did he build? He built a temple of eternal devotion inside his heart. In that, he lit the lamp of knowledge. Then he anointed the Lord with the tears of bliss. And then he fed him the nectar of love. So he didn't build some massive stone temple with lots of corridors and all that. The temple was built inside him. And that is all that he did. He didn't do anything else. Shiva, overcome by this devotion, arrived one day and showed him his sacred feet and said, "Come, you will now live with me forever." This is all that is there about this great Nayanmar who was called Vayilar Nayanar. And he has got a sanctum in this temple. Thereafter, we have a long gap. The 12th century describes the Periya Puranam. And after that, we have to wait for 300 years when we finally come to the arrival of Arunagirinathar. Arunagirinathar, the great composer of the Tiruppugal, who made it his life's mission to wander around all the shrines associated with Subramanya Swami or Murugan, and he has dedicated 10 of his Tiruppugal to Thirumayilai, to Singaravelar Murugan, who is over here. Of these, today I will request Bharat Sundar to sing one of them for you.
அயிலொத்தெழுமிரு விழிகளே அமுதொத்திடுமரு மொழிகளே அயிலொத்தெழும் மிருவிழிகளே அமுதொத்திடுமரு மொழியாலே சயிலத்தெழு துணை முலையாலே தடையுற்றடியனும் அடிவேனோ சயிலத்தெழு துணை முலையாலே தடையுற்றடியனும் அடிவேனோ கையிலை பதியரன் முருகோனே கையிலை பதியரன் முருகோனே கையிலை பதியரன் முருகோனே கடல கரை திரையருகே சூழ் கையிலை பதி அரண் முருகோனே கடல கரை திரை அருகே சூழ்மயிலை பதிதனில் உறைவோனே மகிமை கடியவர் பெருமாளே மயிலை பதிதனில் உறைவோனே மகிமை கடியவர் பெருமாளே.
It is very interesting to see what Arunagirinathar has to say about Mylapore. He says in one of these verses, Vadivu ulavi agasa milirpalavi நீள் சோலை வனசவாவி பூவோடை வயலோடே மணிசெய் மாட மாமேடை சிகரமோடு வாகான மயிலை. this Mailai which is so beautifully planned, Vahana Mailai. அவ்வளோ அழகாக அப்படி ஒரு பிளான் பண்ணி கட்டியிருக்காளாம் அந்த மயிலையை. அதில் வடிவு உலாவி, பியூட்டி இஸ் ஜஸ்ட் வாண்டரிங் இன் திஸ் பிளேஸ். இட் இஸ் சச் அ லவ்லி பிளேஸ். ஆகாஷ மிளிர்பலாவி நீள் சோலை. த groves have grown to such a height that they are almost touching the sky. Vanasha vavi பூவோடை வயலோடை, with a river flowing through it. We don't know what river. With lakes filled with flowers and with fields located all around it. Manisei Mada Mamedai Sigaramodu, with tall buildings which have got cupolas on top of them and with bells hanging from the, an ornamentation hanging from all the verandas or balconies. This is the kind of Mailai that he is describing. And then he also says, Azhagum Ilakkiya Pulamayum Mahimayum Valamum Urai Thiru Mailai. This Mailai which is beautiful, it is exalted in literature and in poetry, and it is great by itself. In that Mailai, Singaravelar has got a shrine. Singaravelar himself is a very interesting deity in this temple. That is because if Kapaliswara is the main lord of this temple and he has got a flagstaff or a Dvajastambam in front of him, which indicates that he has got the right to come out in procession once a year, Singaravelar also has a Dvajastambam in front of him, thereby indicating that he is an independent deity. He is not subservient to Kapaliswara, the father. He has got a flagstaff in front of him, and there are certain days of the year when he comes out himself in procession. And he is actually accorded equal status to Kapaliswara in this particular temple. Singaravelar, it is said, was perhaps the original occupant of this site where the Kapaliswara temple stands today. They say that the Kapaliswara temple was by the sea. Certainly, Arunagirinathar says that it is by the sea. Samandar says, Oorthirai ulavum madamailai. Oorthirai velai ulavum madamailai. That is, the waves are coming and lapping the coast of this Mailai or this temple. So, the temple must have existed there. And we do know that historically the temple has been relocated. As to when it was relocated, we are not very clear. Certainly, there is a lot of theory that is said that the Portuguese were responsible for the demolition of this particular temple where it existed. And even today, in the area surrounding the Santhome Basilica, till very recently, small artifacts used to emerge of temple pillars and things like that, indicating that there was a shrine once originally by the sea. When we read Robert Sewell's The Forgotten Empire, which is about Vijayanagar, he says that in the 16th century, Aliya Ramaraya, the son-in-law of King Krishnadevaraya, was invited by the residents of Mylapore to come and see for himself the damage that was being inflicted on the temples by the Portuguese. And Ramaraya arrives, but then departs. Probably he was bought over by gifts by the Portuguese themselves. So, there is a fleeting reference to temples being demolished at that time, but we can't go by just that. But we do know that the temple was relocated, and very likely when it was relocated, it came to occupy the precinct where Singaravelar was already situated. Singaravelar is unique for yet another aspect. He himself is seated on a peacock with 6 faces, and he is flanked by Valli and Devasena. They are not standing. And they are not mounted on the same peacock either. This is the only temple where you will find Valli and Devasena seated on 2 independent elephants next to Singaravelar. This is the only such sculptural representation. Nowhere else in India can you see this. So, this is a very unique shrine by itself, and in keeping with that status, perhaps Singaravelar himself is exalted in song just as Kapaliswarar is. Sometime in the 17th century, the Kapaliswarar temple acquired its present contours. The East India Company servants, Nattu Subbaraya Mudali, Kumarappa Mudali, Kundra Vellayappa Mudali, these were all people who played a very important role in relocating the temple to where it is now and to giving it its present shape and structure. There are clear documentations available on what each of these people did for the temple at various stages. So, we can safely assume that by the 17th century, the temple had moved to where it is with that large tank in front of it, which, as is well known, was given by the Nawab of Arcot in donation to the temple. And even today, during the float festival of the Kapaliswarar shrine, the first invitation is sent out to the Nawab of Arcot. His Highness Muhammad Abdul Ali, the present Nawab, himself told me that he greatly enjoys coming to the float festival and visiting it, and he considers it to be a privilege to be extended this invitation year after year. Today, the principal deities of the temple, therefore, are Kapaliswara and the goddess Karpagambal. I have not mentioned Karpagambal to you at all in the course of this presentation up to now. Certainly, during the Chola times, the goddess would not have been a consort to this Lord Kapaliswara. The legend of Karpagambal itself appears to be a later construction because the Thevaram does not mention it. But we do know that somewhere along the line, the legend that the goddess came down and worshipped Kapaliswara in the form of a peacock and then married him eventually became the temple legend, the Mailai Puranam. And today, during the 10-day Brahmotsavam, that particular event of the goddess worshipping him as a peacock and then marrying him becomes a very important and a very climactic moment in the festival. We now take a long jump. So, we last heard about songs in the 15th century when Arunagirinathar came here. Now, we need to move up to the 19th century, the 18th century actually, when we find that the composer of the Ramanatakam, Arunachala Kavi, comes and visits Mylapore. Arunachala Kavi, as we all know, towards the end of the 18th century, completed his Ramanatakam and then went on a series of trips to various places to present the whole thing in front of patrons. And he came to Madras as well, and here it appears that he visited the Kapaliswarar temple, and there we find that he has composed compositions on the goddess Karpagambal as well as on Singaravelar. One song, Ayiram Kangal Venum Mailapuri Arumuga Singara Velavarai Kana Ayiram Kangal Vendum is the Pallavi. And then there are two Sringara Padams written by him on the same Singaravelar as well. And then there is a song on him on the goddess Karpagambal as well. Unfortunately, we don't have the tune of these compositions, but we know certainly he must have been the first of the great composers who came and visited the shrine and left behind compositions. At the same time as the arrival of Arunachala Kavi, a whole host of Tamil poetry appears to have made its way into this temple. Hardly anything is known about most of these Tamil verses and poems. So, we have the Karpagavalli Padigam of Tachi Arunachala Mudali. Tachi Arunachala Mudali street is in Mylapore even today, bordering Mandaveli, and it appears that whoever he was, he has left behind 10 verses on Karpagambal. These are in fact inscribed on the wall of the Karpagambal sanctum itself. And I thank scholar Sujata Vijayaraghavan for alerting me to the existence of this poem. I must have visited this temple so many times and I never bothered to read it, though it was there right in front of me. So, last evening I went there and then I hastily made note of the first verse alone, which I will now read out to you. Purani Manonmani Dayapari Parapari Puratani Dara Dharamellam Purudan Alitta Shivashakti Imavan Udavu Putri Mahamayi Endre Sirani Tamil Kavidai Padi Murai Iduvadu Un Sevidanil Padavillayo. This is the beginning of the verse. And every verse ends with Virai Malar Kudalvalli, Marai Malar Padavalli, Vimali Karpagavalliye. This is how each of the 10 verses ends. Uve Swaminatha Iyer, the Tamil Tata, has recorded no less than 30 works on the Mylapore temple. The Thirumailai Karpaganayaki Malai, he says, is an anonymous work and he has published it. And in that work, while the author is unknown, we know very clearly that he was a temple functionary and that he was suspended for malfeasance, though he was innocent, and he prayed to the goddess and he was reinstated and his honesty was established. the author, whoever he was, thanks the goddess in the course of this particular work. Similarly, there is a Thirumailai Karpaganayaki Malai written by Thirumailai Shanmukha Pillai, of whom we have no idea. There is a Thirumailai Yamakka Andadi written by Tandavaraya Kavirayar, who was one of the professors in the Madras School or the Madras College, the College of Fort St. George, which existed in College Road, and Uve Swaminatha Iyer's guru, Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, has visited it. Swaminatha Iyer also documents the existence of a Kapaliswarar Pancharatnam, 5 compositions on Kapaliswarar, probably in Tamil, which apparently was published by him in 1932. And he does not say he didn't know who the author was. Then Swaminatha Iyer's own guru, Mahavidwan Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, began writing the Thirumailai Puranam, which finally never saw the light of day. Then we have the Thirumailai Ula, which is an anonymous work again. And this Ula is very interesting. Like all Ulas, it is structured as Kapaliswarar coming out in procession and 3 women witnessing the procession. One is a very young girl who does not know what it is to fall in love, but experiences an emotion which she does not realize what it is on seeing Kapaliswarar coming out in procession. The second is a more mature individual who realizes what this child is going through and begins to interpret it. The third is a fully mature woman who knows that ultimately your only duty is to surrender to the Lord as he comes out in procession. But the Ula itself is a stunning description of the way the Lord is brought out in procession during the Brahmotsavam in beautiful Tamil. Then we have Thirumailai Kapalishar Rettai Manimalai written by Thenampet Subaraya Mudali. This was composed in the 1880s. And this one is actually an Antadi in the sense that the last word of every verse becomes the opening word of the succeeding verse. But why is it called a Rettai Manimalai? Each word lends itself to 2 succeeding verses, each one of which is in a different structure. So you can read 5 of one structure and 5 of another structure, or you can read both of them together and get to 10 verses. Then you have got Thirumailai Kapalishar Padikam written by Tiruporur D. Gopal Nayakar and Thirumailai Karpakavalli Padikam also written by Tiruporur D. Gopal Nayakar, all published in, these 2 published in 1914. So these are some of the great Tamil works that came out of this temple, of which sadly we appear to know nothing, not even of their existence. Now we come to the Carnatic music side, of which we have a slightly long history. Early in the 20th century, the descendant of the Muthuswami Dikshitar clan, Ambi Dikshitar, came to Madras and began to live over here. And during this time, he stayed in Mylapore and he was taken care of by T.L. Venkatrama Iyer for some time, and then by his disciples who would later go on to found the Guruguha Gana Vidyalaya in Calcutta. They took care of him till his passing away in 1936-1937. He has composed a Varnam on Kapalishwara and a composition on the goddess Kalpakambika. The Varnam on Kapalishwara is in the Raga Mohanam, and Bharat will now sing the opening part of that particular Varnam for you.
Kapaliswaram, Kapaliswaram bhajeham, Kapaliswaram bhajeham, Kapaliswaram bhajeham, kamita phala-prada chaturadaram Shri Kapaliswaram bhajeham, kamita phala-prada चतुरतरं श्रीकल्पकाम्ब कल्पकाम्ब समेतं मयूरपुरी विहारं गपगरि रि स सरि स द स पद सरि गपगरि सरि गपगरि रि स सरि स द स पद सरि गपगरि सरि गपद पद पद सरि गरि स द स रि स द पद साद पगरि कप लीश्वरम्
Harikeshanallur Muttaya Bhagavatar also lived in Sannidhi Street. I mentioned to you that T.L. Venkatarama Iyer took care of Ambi Dikshitar. He was, after all, the first cousin of Harikeshanallur Muttaya Bhagavatar, and the two of them occupied the same building in Sannidhi Street. And Muttaya Bhagavatar, it would appear, composed the English note along with Thirupayanam Panchapakesha Sastrigal at around this time. This is only my conjecture. I do not have historic proof for this. But what is very interesting is that the English note itself is still performed in the procession of the Kapaliswarar temple. It would almost appear as though there is a continuing connection with Muttaya Bhagavatar after so many years. A larger corpus of songs was endowed on this temple by Kotishwara Iyer. Kotishwara Iyer was the grandson of Kavi Kunjara Bharati. Well versed in music, he was a translator at the High Court of Madras and later worked as a professor at the Sanskrit College and also at the Venkatramana Ayurveda Dispensary. Kotishwara Iyer took it upon himself to prove that all the 72 Melakartas are as musical as each other. In that, he was essentially fighting against the commonly held notion that the 40 Melakartas which are classified as Vivadis or dissonant ragas were inauspicious and it was not correct to sing in them. He therefore began composing songs in all the Melakarta ragas one after the other. And all of them are dedicated to the Singaravelar in the Kapaliswarar temple. S. Rajam, who was my mentor in every way and who told me several stories about the Kapaliswarar temple, recalled how he had seen while coming back from school on several days in the afternoons, he would see Kotishwara Iyer standing at the corner of the Tekkur Selva Vinayagar Kovil street, which is where he lived, and facing the Gopuram would be mumbling something. And Rajam says he did not even know that at that time work was going on composing and he was actually witnessing a great Vagayakara in the process of creating music. But that is what Kotishwara Iyer was doing, and very interestingly, it would be Rajam who would then make the Kotishwara Iyer compositions popular. After all, Kotishwara Iyer, even in his lifetime, published the works. He published all the compositions in 2 volumes called the Kanda Ganamudam. But he passed away in the 1930s. And thereafter, for a good 40 years, these compositions would not see the light of day except for 1 or 2. It was Rajam who, as in his capacity as program director in All India Radio, who took it upon himself to get other musicians to come and sing and record the entire set of Kotishwara Iyer compositions, all of them dedicated to Singaravelar. Now, if Singaravelar was going to get 72 compositions dedicated to himself, his father Kapaliswara was not going to be idle either, and he was just biding his time, so to speak. Because in 1919, for the first time, a man called Polagam Ramaya is invited to come to Kapaliswara temple to perform bhajane during the annual Brahmotsavam. The man who is in charge of the program or the conduct of the musical portions of the Brahmotsavam is A.K. Ramachandra Iyer. the fiery businessman who owned the Midlands Theatre, who also owned Madras Auto Services before it became a part of the TVS group, the man who brought Coca-Cola to Madras, the man who introduced Parker pens to India, and the father of my dear friend A.R. Sundaram, who passed away just a decade ago, and who also used to give me a lot of stories on Mylapore. Sunda Mami was an icon in her own right. Now, A.K. Ramachandra was the man who invited Papanasam Sivan to come to perform in Madras the Brahmotsava Bhajanes, and Sivan was supposed to come on the night of the Rishabhavahanam festival, which is the 5th night of the temple festival. Sivan arrives and Ramachandra is waiting for him. Ramachandra does not realize that this emaciated man in a 4-cubit dhoti, standing at the entrance wearing a vibhuti and rudraksham and no followers, nothing. He didn't realize that this was Papanasam Sivan. And when somebody told him that it is indeed that man who is standing at your doorstep, he was very insulted. He felt that Sivan did not measure up to his standards of what a Bhagavatar ought to be. And therefore, he did not accord Sivan any respect. He made him stand outside the house. It was Ramachandra's wife Lakshmi who took Sivan via a back entrance into the house, made him stay in the kitchen and fed him and took care of him during the day. The Rishabhavahanam festival itself begins late in the night at around 11:30 when the Lord comes out, and by the time it reaches North Mada Street, which is where A.K. Ramachandra's residence is, it was almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Somebody came and woke up A.K. Ramachandra and said the Lord has come, and it was customary to come out with Vetalapaku, Pazham and all offerings. When he came out, he found that a large group was following somebody singing bhajans and going along. He, out of curiosity, went to see and he found that it was Papanasam Sivan. He realized that that was the impact of Papanasam Sivan's music. He also followed, and when they came to the Padinarukal Mandapam, which marks the culmination of the procession, he prostrated before Papanasam Sivan, begged his pardon. Next day organized a concert of Papanasam Sivan's at his house and gave him 250 rupees, which was a lot of money in 1919. Then Sivan performed concerts in the house of certain other prominent people like T.R. Venkatarama Shastri and others. Thereafter, it became customary for Sivan to come every year to Mylapore to perform during the annual Brahmotsavam. In 1931-32, Sivan decided that he could not stay away from this temple any longer. He had no idea how his life was going to be led later. He had never had any idea. His music and his bhakti had taken him thus far. With just that as his bedrock, he arrived in Mylapore and took up residence in Matalanarayanan Street. Rest is history, but it is at this critical point that Sivan's book or his biography, Enadu Ninaivu Kadal, ends. And the last line is perhaps the most moving. He says, Karpagam and Kapali made me come and stay with them. And that's it. With that, the book actually comes to an end. Sivan is going to live for another 50 years almost, or rather, yeah, he passed away in 40 years. He's going to live for another 40 years. His greatest years were ahead of him. He didn't know all that. But the first step had been taken in that direction. Kapali and Karpagam had picked up this unknown and they had placed him in Mylapore. And thereafter, he would become the legend that he was going to be. Sivan lavished his love and affection on Kapali and Karpagam and on Singaravelar. A total of 56 songs of Sivan exist on this temple. It's a remarkable corpus for one man and on one temple. I used to have a colleague who is sadly no more, and we once discussed this whole topic of Sivan and the great composers and things like that. And then he said, do you know why the Carnatic Trinity and all the others never came to Mylapore? Kapali was all along reserving Papanasam Sivan to land up and give him those compositions. And that is why they all kept a clean slate. Then Sivan came and filled it completely with music. And I thought that was a remarkable sentiment. Kotishwar Iyer left behind 72 compositions on Singaravelar. Many of them today have become popular pieces on the concert platform. Bharat will now sing the composition in Keeravani.
Velava vinitira வேலவா வினைத்தீர வேல் வீர வேலவா வினைத்தீர வேல் வீர வேலவா வினைத்தீர வேல் வீர வேலவா வினை தீர வேல் வீர வேலவா வினை தீர வேல் வீர வேலவா வினை தீர शील भक्त परि पाल शील भक्त परि पाल शील भक्त परि पाल गुणशील काल काल शिव बाल करुण लवल वेलव शील भक्त परि पाल गुणशील काल काल शिव बाल करुण लवल वेलव विनय तीर वेल वीर वेलव
Having spoken to you about the Kapaliswarar temple and about Shivan, I must now take you through the temple festival. That is because Shivan himself was a living presence in the temple festival itself. The temple festival itself contributed to plenty of history in music and dance. So let me take you through the temple calendar of the Kapaliswarar shrine. The actual year begins more or less, if you look at the modern calendar that we have. While there are festivals right through the year, every day you will find some minor deities coming out in procession. Every Pradosham you will find Kapaliswarar and Karpagam are coming out on a Rishabha Vahanam with Nadaswaram playing, Hara Hara Shankara being chanted. All that happens. All the Nayanmars will come out on their Nakshatram day, that particular Nayanmar will come out in procession. All these things happen, and as Samandar mandated in his Poompa Padigam, those monthly festivals also keep happening. So there's a lot of activity, buzz in the Kapaliswarar temple with a lot of Nagaswaram, Tavil, Tevaram singing, everything happens. So it's a musical place by itself. But the annual festivals are very, very special. Let me begin with the float festival, also known as the Teppam or the Sarasotsavam, which is really the first festival which happens in the calendar, which probably happens in January, February, around that time. For 3 days, a beautiful float is constructed on the Kapaliswarar temple tank. These are days when the tank does not always have water. But in the years when the monsoon is good and when the channels have not been blocked by people building houses and multi-storied buildings and other such things, and when Kapaliswarar is allowed to get his water, we have a float festival. The float festival itself has this wonderful floral float that is constructed, a complete work of art that is constructed from scratch every time, put on a set of drums on which we don't need to look at the basis of it, and that is not very aesthetic, but yes, those drums are actually buoying up the entire float. And on top of it, you have this palatial structure that is constructed, and there for 3 days in the evening, with the entire tank illuminated with lights, the float will make a journey around the temple tank. It doesn't float, it is actually towed by men on the banks, and they take it all around on the steps, and then it comes back to the starting point. On the first day, you have Chandrasekhara with his consort, Kalyana Chandrasekhara, who comes out with his consort in the float, and on the second and the third day, you have got Singaravelar coming out on the float itself. On all the days, music is performed. It is either Nagaswaram or a great musician is invited to perform in the float festival itself. There was a time when the public would also be allowed into the float. I have been on it myself, so it's not all that long way off. Maybe it is a long way off. The float would come and stop, and you would get in batches. It would then let you off halfway, pick up fresh people, bring them back at the end of one circle, then again the next round, and then a third round, with musicians performing right through. I am told in the 50s, you had loudspeaker arrangements all around the temple tank during the float festival. People have actually sat on the steps and heard Maduramani Iyer sing on the float. Mr. K.V. Ramanathan, one of my mentors as far as music and history is concerned, he remembered having sat through these musical concerts with just the float floating around, and you can imagine in the 50s with the silence that must have existed all around, what a feast it must have been for the ears as well as for the eyes. And then you have the Brahmotsavam. The Brahmotsavam happens in the month of Panguni, culminating in Panguni Uttaram. Samandar says, Malivizha Veedi Madanallar Mamayilai, Kalivizha Kandan Kapalicharam Amarndan, Olivizha Padal Sei Panguni Uttaram Nal, Palivizha Kanade Podio Pumpavai. Malivizha Veedi Madanallar Mamayilai. These streets of Mailai, which are filled with beautiful women, and where festivals are happening all the time, which is so true even today. There is a festivity happening all the time. In that, Kalivizha Kandan Kapali Cheramamandan. This Kapali has come and he is celebrating his Vija, his festival. Olivizha Padal Sei Panguni Uttaram Nal. Olivizha Padal Sei, with music, sounds of music reverberating. This Panguni Uttaram Nal Palivizha is being celebrated. Pumpavai, you are not here to witness it. There is so much of music during those 10 days and then the 10 days that follow, that it is not possible to just describe it. Now every day, beginning from the day when the flag is hoisted on the temple Dvajastambam, and you know that the temple is in festival, twice a day the deities will come out in procession on various mounts, all the 5. That is Nartana Ganapati. Here, incidentally, Ganesha is a dancing Ganesha. The sanctum of Ganesha itself does not have a seated Ganesha. He is standing and dancing on one leg. So music and dance is given that much of importance over here. So Ganesha is the first deity to come out, succeeded by a magnificent Somaskanda, Kapaliswarar with his consort, and Subramanya Swami as a baby in the middle. And on certain days, in a very inspired moment, whoever does the decoration, they'll actually place the skanda on the lap of Kapaliswara. And it will almost look as though the father is holding the baby like this and taking him around the streets to show him, look, that is that house, this is that house, look how dirty that corner is, they haven't cleaned it, look at that bus hooting behind us, and so on and so forth. It's almost like a baby being entertained by a father on a car journey. Following this Somaskanda is Karpagambal herself. Then behind that is Singaravelar with Valli and Devasena, and finally Chandeshwarar. So these are the Panchamurtis that come out in festival. Certain days are very, very special in this calendar. The third day morning is when Shiva as Somaskanda comes out on Adhikara Nandi. This Adhikara Nandi is a huge silver coated wooden Nandi, a Nandi with 4 arms, kneeling down with holding Kapalishwara's feet in the 2 forearms, and then having the Maru and the Man on the rear arms, and Kapalishwarar himself brilliantly decorated. The most dramatic moment is when the deity emerges from the Gopuram in the morning and enters the Padinarukal Mandapam from an angle. So suddenly you will find that there is a lot of noise and mridangam and tawil and nagaswaram and all that, and Kapali makes a grand entry to everybody shouting Harohara, Kapali, Kapali and things like that. It's a very thrilling moment. And then Kapali arrives and goes around the temple, the 4 Madavidis in procession. He is accompanied by Karpagambal and Singaravelar, and they are on Gandharva and Gandharvastri, all of them playing the veena. The Vahanams are actually playing the veena when they are coming out like that in procession. Now Sivan, having seen this, surely he had to sing, such a musical moment. And that is when we have Kana Kankodi Vendum in Kamboji, which Bharat will now sing. And the charanam of the verse of this particular composition is so special because it describes the whole procession itself. It talks about Shiva on Adhikaranandi, Karpagambal, Ganesha, Singaravelar, Chandeshwarar, everybody coming out in procession. And you know, the words Andi Vanamo, Kamala Vanamo, I mean, on seeing, and what is this that I am witnessing, this particular spectacle? And you know, those of us who have been privileged to witness this festival year after year after year, we haven't found an answer to those questions that Shivan asks. Is it Andi Vanama? Is it Kamala Vanamo? What is, are there nakshatrams that have come out like this in procession? It is by far, you know, we all, no matter whether the traffic is bad, no matter whether, you know, we have got office meetings to go, these processions are not some things that can be missed. They are high points in the calendar. They are actually the mood boosters and the energy boosters for carrying on for the rest of the year.
மாலோடையின் பணியும் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் பரவும் மாலோடையன் பணியும் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் பரவும் மாலோடையன் பணியும் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் பரவும் மாலோடையன் பணியும் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் பரவும் மறையாகமல் தூதிக்கும் இறைவன் அருள் பெறவே மறையாகமல் தூதிக்கும் இறைவன் அருள் பெறவே காலம் செல்லும் நமது காலம் செல்லும் நமது காலம் செல்லும் நமது காலம் செல்லும் கன தனமும் தந்தார்க்கு நமது காலம் செல்லும் கன தனமும் தந்தார்க்கு நன்றி கருதி கண்ணார கண்டுள்ளுருகி பணிய பலர் காணரு முகனும் கணபதியும் சண்டேஸ்வரனும் சிவகணமும் பலர் காண அருமுகனும் கணபதியும் சண்டேஸ்வரனும் சிவகணமும் தொடர கலைவாணி திருவும் பணி கல்பகநாயகி வாமன் அதிகார நல்தி சேவை கலைவாணி திருவும் பணி கல்பகநாயகி வாமன் அதிகார நந்தி சேவை தன்னை காண கண் கோடி வேணும் கபாலியில் பவனி காண கண் கோடி வேணும் கபாலியில் பவனி
So Adhikara Nandi happens on the third day in the morning, and then on the fifth day in the night you have the Rishabha Vahanam. Rishabha Vahanam is when, as I said, Kapaliswarar comes out on this beautiful silver Rishabham Behind Karpagambal on a golden Rishabam, Singaravelar on a golden peacock, Ganapati on a silver Mushikam, and Chandeshwara on a tiny silver Rishabam behind. And they go around the entire 4 Madavidis, and this night is very special because Kapaliswarar is not dragged in a chariot or any such thing or on a contraption with wheels. He is borne by bearers right through this procession. And the mount and the Somaskanda, the umbrella, the flowers, it cannot be less than a ton in weight. And you have these bearers with these huge teak wood poles, 10 to 12 feet, all of them holding each other. So on both sides, you have these men. And the man on this side is resting on the man on that side. And it is only on their shoulders that that entire ensemble, including the priests, they are also sitting on top of it. It's not as though they are lessening the weight. They are also there. And the procession then embarks and goes all around the temple. In the great days of the past, this is when the great Nagaswaram performances would happen in relay. 2 hours Kiranur brothers, 2 hours Sembonar Kovil brothers, 2 hours Thiruvavadurai Rajaratnam Pillai if he was in a good mood and he could deign to perform. And then Thiruvadamarudur Veerasamy Pillai and so on and so forth. In relay, the Nagaswarams would happen till finally Kapaliswarar would come back to the Padinarakal Mandapam. Now, the celebration doesn't end with Kapaliswarar having had all that Nagaswaram and music and everything. Now, he has to dance himself. So, finally, at the Padinarakal Mandapam at 5 o'clock in the morning, Kapali has arrived, Karpagam has arrived, Singaravelar has arrived, everybody is there. Then the priests do, you can imagine an atmosphere when the illumination was only with gas lights, nothing other than that. And the priests then do a Karpura Arati for all the deities. Chandeshwarar goes in first, then Ganesha goes in, then Singaravelar goes in, Karpagambal goes into the temple. Kapali finally with his Somaskanda, he is there on his Rishabam. There is a moment of expectation, complete silence because we know something great is going to happen next. And then the band begins playing, and these men who have carried Kapali right through the night, they will begin dancing with Kapali on top of them. This Kapali who is still weighing 1 ton, he is not reduced even 1 bit in weight, they will dance with the idol. The dance is momentary, it's only for 5 minutes maybe. And the tune is for He's a Jolly Good Fellow or it's English note, it's nothing. But the movement, with, words fail me, you know, I am just imagining that dance as I have witnessed it all these years. They will even lift the wooden pole and catch it. And you will find Kapali jumping up and down, flowers falling off on all sides, the priests holding on to the idol for dear life because they'll fall off if they don't hold on to something tightly. And then with a huge roar, they will climb the slope and get into the temple. It is their way of building up energy for that last bit of getting into the temple. All of us weep copiously when we witness that 5 minutes of that English music, and I just can't. I mean, 2 years we haven't witnessed it, and hopefully, you know, we should go back to seeing it very soon. So this is probably the highlight of the Kapaliswarar temple's 10-day festival, this music and this dance, and Karpagam following him every day in a different suit. Interestingly, Karpagam, you know, there was a controversy about some temple, I think it was Kumbakonam, where Mangalambike was dressed in a salwar kameez on a particular day, and then they suspended the temple priest. In Kapaliswarar temple, all the 10 nights and 10 days in the morning, Karpagam comes out with a floral skirt kind of thing in the top and a pajama like dress only at the base. Every day with salangai tied at the feet. So this is how the goddess is decorated every day. This is so unique to this particular temple. Nowhere else will you see it. Now, I haven't finished with the temple festival. On the 7th day, we have the Ther. The Ther is again an occasion when you will find that lot of Nagaswaram is performed. People come to pull the chariot themselves. And then on the 8th day, you have the Aravatti Mover festival. Aravatti Mover, as I told you, these were the 63 canonical saints of the Shaivite order. And these were all people who adored Shiva. Some of the stories can be really macabre, but the devotion is what sees them through. Shiva challenges every one of them, and they all work upon Shiva and they impress him eventually despite all the suffering. This is the moral of all the 63, that Shiva will give them a lot of trouble and they will prove to him that they are not ordinary people. Finally, he will come and take them away. So, these 63 followers of Shiva will be brought out in procession in the afternoon on the 8th day, which is the Arvati Mover festival. And on this day, you will find that in several palanquins, the Arvati Mover is brought out, all of them facing Shiva and moving backwards, because he is then coming out in a huge canopy, silver canopy, and he is following them, but they are all only looking at him like this and they are being led away in procession. Then, of course, Karpagam and others. Almost 300,000 people will descend on the temple to witness this festival. The day begins with Thirugnana Samandar being taken to the temple tank and the reenactment of that giving of sacred milk which happened in Sirgari, with which I began this presentation. That is reenacted because this is a day that is sacred to the 63 followers of Shiva. So, Samandar, because he is associated with this temple, and then on this evening all 63 will come out in procession. It will take almost 7 hours by the time the procession wends its way, and the temperature will, nothing is comfortable. The temperature will be at 41 or 42 degrees. You will have this crowd all over the place. You will have Tannir Pandals, charitable pandals where milk and water and biscuits and food is given. That adds to the mess sometimes, but it's a very noble intent with which it is done. There is no doubt about it. And let's not forget that the Tannir Pandal itself is part of Thevaram lore, because Appudi Adigal, who was a follower of Appar, he set up Tannir Pandals wherever Appar was coming. So, it is in that tradition that the Kapaliswarar temple also sets up Tannir Pandals, all voluntary. Nobody, the temple doesn't set up anything. These Tannir Pandals are all put up by people. There are two families that have been putting up Tannir Pandals for 175 years. And they are not some multimillionaires. They are people who are carpenters, and they have their space allotted to them in front of the temple tank. Nobody else can take it. The corporation recognizes their right to put up Tannir Pandals twice a year. You go there, they will offer you a hand fan which you are supposed to take with you as their gift. But they will first fan you for 5 minutes and then give it to you. Everybody will be given sliced cucumber and lime juice and buttermilk, and only then they will send you away. 175 years they have been following this tradition of setting up a Tannir Pandal. It's not easy, but these people are doing it, and they don't believe in accepting donations. I once made the mistake of making an offer. They said, sorry, we don't take any donations. It's part of our family's duty to conduct this. So, that festival ends, and because this Arvati Mover is the people's festival, you can imagine 300,000 people descending. It also became the subject of great poetry. When I say great poetry, I should use the word popular poetry. So, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, you had a concept of Varinadai Chindis, Nadai Chind, that is, a couple is singing a poem about the places that they are seeing as they are going along to a particular destination. So, this Aravati Mover Varinadai Chinde, also known as People's Park Varinadai Chinde, I don't know how, but People's Park was a huge park of 600, I forget how many acres, I think 200 acres or something like that, located where the central station and Moor Market and Ripon building and all are today. So, that is where People's Park was. So, this Varinadai Chinde describes a young couple setting out from Georgetown to see the Aravati Mover festival. And from Georgetown, as they come walking, they describe all the sights of Madras till they finally cross over the Varavadi and they finally reach Mylapore, and then they describe the Aravati Mover, and it ends with a burst of devotion. Written in very colloquial Tamil, but a valuable record of the city's history. It talks about what buildings were in which particular spot. And several years ago, at this very same tag center, on a Madras Day celebration funded by Mr. R.T. Chari, we had an enactment of the Varinadai Chinde, but by Gayatri and Balagurunathan. They were the two dancers who did it. I made a PowerPoint presentation on all the locations that that couple walked through, and we had it with music and dance right over here on this very same stage. Sadly, owing to a technical glitch, the recording failed. And so we don't have a recording of it anymore. But someday we should get it done, resurrected. But the Vainadai Sindhu is something else. It's a beautiful description of Madras city. On that day, Kapali reaches the temple after the Aravati mover is over at 10 o'clock at night, but his job is not done. He then comes out as Chandrasekhara on a horseback at 11 o'clock at night. When he goes back, he finds the temple doors are shut. And the goddess asks him to produce his signet ring, without which he cannot enter the temple. Kapali has lost the ring. So Karpagambal tells him, sorry, you can't come inside the temple, stay outside. Next day in the evening, Kapali emerges as a nude mendicant, as Bhikshatana. And he begins coming out in procession as usual. And there's a brilliant bronze, a Bhikshatana bronze in the Kapaliswarar temple. In the old days, I'm talking about old days, not so old days actually, in the 1970s, that bronze used to be brought out as it was. Now they have made him look like Neil Armstrong. They just cover him with kavachams and flowers and this, that and sundry, that you can't make out the beauty of that bronze anymore. But he is brought out in procession in the, he comes down from South Mada Street, he begins coming down to R.K. Mat Road. Karpagambal gets nervous because, she thinks that Shiva has gone out as a mendicant and all the women of Mailai will now run after this handsome nude mendicant. So she comes in the anti-clockwise direction via North Mada Street, dressed as Mohini. Then in the R.K. Mat Road crossing, they have a meeting. And Karpagambal then does a most spirited dance to entice Shiva back with all this Nadar Mudimel Adum Nagapambe. Nadanamakriyas is essentially used. A lot of Abheri is also used. And at the end of it, Shiva's heart melts and he accompanies Karpagambal back into the temple. Now this Bhikshatana procession was very important as far as the Devadasi tradition was concerned with this Kapaliswarar temple. The reason is Shiva is seducing all the women and they are running after him. So the Devadasis would dance in the procession as the temple, as the Lord would come down. And the most famous was this 19th century Devadasi, Mylapore Doraikannammal. And it was said that the crowds would gather largely to witness Doraikannu coming down dancing. And Doraikannu died fairly early. And after she died, her patron went blind because of cataract. And the doctor, I believe, said that you can get yourself treated and have your vision restored. He said, after Doraikannu is dead, what do I have to see? I'll remain blind for the rest of my life. It doesn't really matter. Doraikannu's daughter was the famed Mylapore Gauri Ammal, who was the last Devadasi of the Kapaliswarar temple. So Kapali and Karpagam are united on the 9th day. Finally, on the 10th day, you have the Thirukkalyanam. Kavikunjara Bharati sings of Murugan Thirukkalyanam Seidu Kondare, Vandu Dharisethellorum Kaatchi Tandare. Vandu Dharisethellorkum Kaatchi Tandare. He gives Kaatchi to all those having married, conducted his marriage. So here Kapali gets married on the 10th day. In the evening of that 10th day, you will find all the people of Mylapore have come with Seer Varisai to give because their daughter is getting married to their son-in-law. People will bring saris, they will bring gold bangles, they're not glass bangles, they will offer fruits. Some people have offered gold jewelry as well. So many things happen in this particular moment. And then near the Punnai tree, a curtain will be drawn and behind that there will be the idol of the peacock worshipping Shiva. Suddenly, Shiva as Somaskanda will come in procession to that particular spot. The lights will go off for a minute. The curtain will fall and you will find Karpagambal rising from the other side as the goddess arising out of the peacock, and then the marriage will be conducted. In the night after the marriage is over, at around 11 o'clock, Shiva and Parvati come out on Ravana. The wedding of Shiva and Parvati having concluded, at 11 o'clock at night, Shiva and Parvati come out on a magnificent Ravana Vahana, and Ravana himself is playing the veena. And that is how the procession then goes around the temple. Now on all these 10 days, there is a building in South Mada Street which opens only for the festival. It is mandated that it will be let out to members of the Mudaliyar community for weddings and other things on normal days. And during these 10 days, it has got a very special role to play. The building is called the Bommai Chatram. It's also known as the Vyasarpadi Vinayaka Mudaliyar Chatram. Vyasarpadi Vinayaka Mudaliar was a Dubash and a very wealthy man at that. He worked for the East India Company and he had a collection of dolls and leather puppets. He constructed this building so that a display of these dolls and leather puppets will be put up only when Kapaliswarar comes out in procession. On all other days, these dolls and puppets will be stored very carefully. On these 10 days, that building will be opened up, thoroughly whitewashed, and these dolls will all be arranged inside it, open to the public to go and see. So, this is it's a very unique aspect of this Kapaliswarar temple, that in South Mada Street this building exists, which has been fulfilling this mandate since the 1880s. When this Bommai Chatram was constructed, it was known as Chitra Chatram, and Uve Swaminatha Iyer's guru, Mahavidwan Veenakshi Sundaram Pillai, came for the inauguration, and he has left behind 100 verses in praise of that Bommai Chatram. And in that one set of verses, praise Vyasarpadi Vinayaka Mudaliar. Terul Petran Vyasanagar Vinayaka Mal Adarkerpa Seir Tirmikka Porul Petran. Adarkerpa Mailail Siranda Sattiram Katti Pugalshal Pemman Arul Petran. Ivan Andri Porul Petrum Aram Seyya Avani Ullar. Marul Petrar Sirumai Petrar Innum Yen Petrar Enin Vasai Petrare. That is, this Vyasarpadi Vinayaka Mudali, he had the vision and he had the wealth corresponding to that, and he had the skill to build this Chittirai Chatram in Mailai. Like him, there are other people who are equally wealthy but do no good to society. What did they get? They got ignorance, they got a lessening of their stature, and they got abuses from everybody in society. This is the poem that Veenakshi Sundaram Pillai has written. And then he talks about how the 4 streets have been embellished by this construction. Karudariya Pugalmailai Kapali Tirtha Nedunkareyor Nangud Poruvaru Kizhkarai Kapali Charathal Ekkalutham Poondu Mevum. That is, of the 4 streets that stand around the Kapalishwarar temple, the eastern street is very proud of itself because the temple itself is there. So, it thinks that it is of a very high status. Arumai Kol Tenkarai Vinayaka Mudali Kal Chatrathal Adu Adayum Matrai Iru Karayum Yen Seivom Endru Yengi Irukum Alo. The status of the East Mada Street was equalled by the South Mada Street because of this stone mandapam. The other 2 streets are crying, saying, what will we do? We don't have any such structure in us. This is what Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai writes about this beautiful Bommai Chatram. Now, Singaravelar by himself, as I said, is a deity with equal rights. On certain days, you will say like Thaipusam, then in Krittikai, when Surasamharam happens, you will find Singaravelar is coming out in procession by himself. And that is occasion for further music and dance to take place. And he is also brought out independently in his own way, processions. He has also got a garden in Mandaveli called Vanabhojana Thotam, where once a year he will go in a picnic and people will accompany him, and there they will eat, they will sing songs to him, and then they will bring him back. So, Singarvelar has got all these separate festivals that his father doesn't have. Karpagambal, though she doesn't step out by way of processions, she also has her festival inside, the most famous of which is the Navaratri festival. On each of the 9 nights, the goddess is decorated differently on separate mounts, and Golu is also conducted all around her. As we know, Papanasam Sivan composed several compositions in praise of this goddess. Gopuram itself has something to do with the world of arts. Till 1905, there was no Gopuram in the Kapalishwarar temple. It was a flat temple with just an arch at the entranceway, a rectangular arch. At that time, the great playwright and dramatist Pamal Samanda Mudaliar became the trustee of the temple. He began a donation drive for the construction of the Gopuram, and it was only in 1905-1906 that the present East Gopuram that we see in the Kapalishwarar temple was constructed. Having looked at all these drama contributions, verse contributions, song contributions, I must also tell you that immediately after the 10-day festival is over, we have the Vidayatri Utsavam. The Vidayatri Utsavam is when Kapali and Karpagam after the wedding are entertained for 10 evenings with music. All the famous musicians of South India will be invited to give concerts over here. This Vidayat, performing in the Vidayatri Utsavam was a matter of great prestige. And only senior Vidwans in the past used to perform for it. There would be Harikatha performances. Nagaswaram would happen in the procession. The concerts would happen after the celestial wedding is over during the Vidayatri. Mushri Subramanya Iyer gave his first performance in Madras at the Kapaliswarar Kovil Vidayatri Utsavam. Then in 1928, when Mushri was scheduled to sing once again and he could not because he had a health issue, they decided to field an unknown graduate, B.A. G.N. Balasubramaniam, B.A. Honours. He was invited to sing in the Vidayatri Utsavam. And the people were very skeptical. They had no idea what he was going to do. But when he sat down and began to perform, they were just taken aback. That was his first concert performance. And then he trailblazed a career till his passing away in the 1960s. He still remains the superstar in the world of Carnatic classical music. So GNB was that. In December, coming to an end of the temple festivals, you have the Margari Masam, which is now ongoing. During this time, you have the bhajanes that take place in the Kapalishwara temple. It is said that early in the 1900s, Umayalpuram Swami Bhagavatar, who was a disciple from the Umayalpuram Shishya Parampara of Tyagaraja, he was invited to come and start the Margari Veedi Bhajane in Mylapore. And he used to conduct it all around the temple. From 1931, Papanasam Shivan became the main man. And Shivan's Margari Bhajane would be, let us not forget that this was not the only Bhajane. There would be several groups that will come out in series, but Shivan's was the greatest. Shivan's Bhajane was a world by itself because the master would come himself. And following him would be all his great disciples. D.K. Jayaraman would be there, Patamal would be there, the Ramnath Krishnan would be there on certain days. Everybody, Setalapati Balu sir would be there. They would all accompany this Margari Masa Bhajane. The two great pillars were Pal Mama and Meesha Mama. Meesha Mama with his tambura, which he would start strumming and singing Shivan songs with a notebook. Even if nobody else had come, he would start the bhajane and then others would join in. Pal Mama would carry milk with a lot of spices in it in a flask, and he would give it only to those people whose songs pleased him on that day. If anybody else asked for it, they would not get even one drop from that particular flask. And Shivan himself would walk, he would compose on the occasion. So as he grew increasingly frail, a moda would be taken along with him and he would sit at various places. It is said that on one such occasion, Ramnath Krishnan said that, Mama, have you ever composed anything in Navarasa Kannada? We have had only Tyagaraja Kritis that we have heard. Is there anything? And next day, Shivan sang Naanoru Vilayattu Bommaya and said, I composed this yesterday because you asked me to. So that song actually took birth in the Margari Masa Bhajane. And thereafter, after Shivan's passing, D.K. Jayaraman used to lead this Shivan Margari Bhajane for a long till he passed away. And Vijay Shiva even now makes it a point to attend the Margari Bhajane on certain days. But today the mainstay are Papanasam Shivan's daughter, Papanasam Rukmini Ramani, and grandson Ashok Ramani. Even today, the Margari Masa Bhajane happens. Rukmini Ramani every year, despite becoming increasingly frail, still manages to come and conduct the Margari Bhajane. And on January 1st, you will find there will be more people. These days, the numbers are dwindling, but still the Shivan Bhajane goes on. But as I said, this is not the only Bhajane that happens. You will find the Ramakrishna Mission group coming, you will find the Oduvar group coming, then you will find some people just chanting Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara going around. So, Margari early morning is a separate world in the Kapalishwara temple. We will now have Bharat sing Naanoru Vilayattu Bommaya.
நானொரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா, நானொரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா, நானொரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா, ஜகன் நாயகியே உமையே உன் உந்தனுக்கு நான் ஒரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா ஜகல் நாயகியே உமையே உந்தனுக்கு நான் ஒரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா ஜகல் நாயகியே உமையே உந்தனுக்கு நான் ஒரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா. நானிலத்தில் பல பிறவி எடுத்து நானிலத்தில் பல பிறவி எடுத்து திண்டாடினது போதாதா தேவி. நானிலத்தில் பல பிறவி எடுத்து திண்டாடினது போதாதா உந்தனுக்கு நான் ஒரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா ஜகல் நாயகியே உமையே உந்தனுக்கு நான் ஒரு விளையாட்டு பொம்மையா பொம்மையா பொம்மையா.
The Nagaswaram tradition, as I told you, Kapaliswarar Kovil has not had any great Nagaswaram performer permanently attached to it, but in the 1950s and 60s, all the great stars have come over here. As I said, the Kiranur brothers, Sembonar Kovil brothers, and so on and so forth. The biographer LRV writes of a very moving incident where he talks about Chindadripet Munusami, who was not a very well-to-do Thavil performer who was living in Mylapore, and a patron had organized for him to go to perform Thavil along with some other Nagaswaram artist at a particular place. Now that evening was the Rishabhavahanam festival in Kapaliswarar temple. This patron was walking down to listen to the Sembonar Kovil brothers playing, and he found Munusami also standing there listening. He got offended and he said, "Munusami, I fixed a concert for you with such difficulty. What are you doing over here?" He said, "Sir, anga enikku venalum poi na vaasichittu vandudalaam, ana Sembonar Kovil brothers na vera enni kekkiradhu, adanal andha kacheriya kettindu na inge vanduten." So this was one. The other one is about the Kiranur brothers performing Nagaswaram. Tiruchengattangudi Rudrapati Pillai playing the Thavil and playing it with such verve and energy that his Vaira Kadkan just broke loose from his ear and fell like a shooting star into the crowd. Everybody else was searching for the Vaira Kadkan. Rudrapati Pillai was not bothered about it at all. He continued performing his Thavil and till the end of the cycle that had to be played. By the time the earring had been located and it had been brought back to him. But such was the dedication. Both these stories are mentioned by LRV in his biography of some other musicians. So the Nagaswaram tradition is huge, and even today, on all times when the temple festival processions happen, Nagaswaram performances are held. And if you thought that the general public doesn't know Carnatic music, correct your opinion. In front of my eyes, I have seen a vegetable woman, seller woman coming and asking the Nagaswaram player, "Iniki nee gaulaye vasikaliye thambi." So this is the amount of information that they have. It is just that we, with our upper class snobbery, we imagine that, you know, people don't know Carnatic music or that they cannot appreciate it. So that is where it is. As I said, the Devadasis were a very integral part of the temple. Mylapur Gauri Ammal was the last of the great Devadasis. Rajam sir remembered coming back from school in the afternoon, in exactly at the Uchikala Puja time when he would go home for lunch from PS High School. He would see Gauri dressed in her chudidar and pyjamas, that, you know, the standard dress of the Devadasis at that time, with the anklets tied around her feet, going with her troupe to perform the afternoon Uchakala Puja Murai, where she would go and do a little bit of dancing and come back. And he always remembered that she looked like a bronze figurine. Now, if you thought that with that, the great days, a common thing in Mylapore to say, "அந்த காலம்லாம் பெரிய காலம் சார், இப்போலாம் ஒன்றுமே இல்லை, எல்லாம் போயிடுது, all dead," I say. அதெல்லாம் golden period. Let me tell you that Mylapore is a temple where the golden period has only continued. It hasn't got over. Kiva Jagannathan, Vagisa Kalanidhi Kiva Jagannathan, the disciple of Uve Swaminatha Iyer, composed a set of verses on this temple on Karpagambal, of which the most famous is Adum Mailai Uruvedithu, which I will now request Bharat Sundar to sing for us.
ஆடும் மயிலாய் உருவெடுத்து அன்று இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி ஆடும் மயிலாய் உருவெடுத்து அன்று இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி அர்ச்சித்த நாயகியாய் இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி அர்ச்சித்த நாயகியாய் நின்னாமங்களை பாடி இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி மயிலாய் உருவெடுத்து அன்று இறைவன் திருத்தாள் நாடி அர்ச்சித்த நாயகியாய் நின்னாமங்களை பாடி பாடி உருகி நின்னாமங்களை பாடி உருகி பரவசமாகும் அப்பாங்கு அருள்வாய் நின்னாமங்களை பாடி உருகி பரவசமாகும் அப்பாங்கு அருள்வாய் காடனவே பொழில் சூழ் காடனவே பொழில் சூழ் காடனவே காடனவே பொழில் சூழ் காடனவே 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 பொழில் சூழ் மயிலாபுரி கற்பகமே காடனவே காடனவே பொழில் சூழ் மயிலாபுரி கற்பகமே கற்பகமே மயிலாபுரி கற்பகமே.
He has composed that set of verses. Then we have had Inuvil Veeramani Iyer, who created this wonderful composition called Thirumailai Kuravanji. கபாலி கடைசியில் தனக்கு ஒன்றுமே விட்டு வச்சுக்கல. எல்லாம் அங்கே தஞ்சாவூரில் நடந்துடுத்து, திருவையாறில் நடந்துடுத்து, பரவாயில்ல திருவாவடுதுறையில் நடந்துட்டு, ஹி வாஸ் ஒன்லி பைடிங் ஹிஸ் டைம். கடைசியில் தனக்கு வேணுங்கிற எல்லாத்தையும் சாதிச்சுட்டார். உலா வாங்கிண்டார், ரெட்டைமணி மாலை வாங்கிண்டார், பஞ்சரத்னத்தை வாங்கிட்டுட்டார், கடைசியில் குரவஞ்சியும் வாங்கிட்டுட்டார். This was in the 20th century. Inuvil Veeramani Iyer from Sri Lanka composed the Thirumailai Kuravanji, and it has been performed. Sujata Vijayaraghavan found the script with great difficulty. Finally, it was located with Veeramani Iyer's wife who was living in Sri Lanka. It was sent over. And then Roja Kannan and Priya Murali choreographed it, and it was performed in full. Today, I will play just a 2-minute video clip for you of this particular Thirumailai Kuravanji, which you will now see on video.
தோழி உன்னை கலந்திடவே அவரும் இங்கு வந்திடுவார்.
Then we have had compositions continuing in the 20th century. Karpagavalli in Bhairavi by Lalita Dasar, Karpagame ennai Kanparai in Ranjani by Kadalur Subramaniam, Kapalisane in Thodi by N.S. Ramachandran, Apara Karuna Sindhum Bhairavisham in Sindhu Bhairavi by R.K. Sriram Kumar. And so the list continues. Kapali and Karpagam continue to inspire people. And long may they continue to inspire all of us to visit them, to sing their praise in song and in dance. Before I come to acknowledgements, we must have a fitting concluding piece to this presentation. We will have Papanasam Sivan's Karpagame in Madhyamavati.
கற்பகமே கண்பாராய், கற்பகமே கண்பாராய், திருமயிலை கற்பகமே கருணை 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 கண்பாராய். சித்பரயோகியர் சித்தர்கள் ஞானியர், சித்பரயோகியர் சித்தர்கள் ஞானியர், சித்பரயோகியர் சித்தர்கள் ஞானியர், சித்பரயோகியர் சித்தர்கள் ஞானியர், திருவுடையடியவர் கருதும் வரமுதவும் திருமகளும் கலிமகளும் பரவும் திருமயிலை கற்பகமே, திருவுடையடியவர் கருதும் வரமுதவும் திருமகளும் கலைமகளும் பரவும் திருமயிலை கற்பகமே கருணை கண்பாராய், திருமயிலை கற்பகமே கருணை கண்பாராய். சத்து சிதானந்தமதாய் சகல உயிர்க்குயிராய வள்ளி, சத்து சிதானந்தமதாய் சகல உயிர்க்குயிராயவள் நீ, சத்து சிதானந்தமதாய் சகல உயிர்க்குயிராயவள் நீ. தத்துவமஸ்யாதி மகாவாக்கிய தத்பரவஸ்துவும் நீ, தத்துவமஸ்யாதி மகாவாக்கிய தத்பரவஸ்துவும் நீ. சத்துவ குணமுடு பக்தி செய்பவர் பவதாபமும் பாபமும் அறவே, சத்துவ குணமுடு பக்தி செய்பவர் பவதாபமும் பாபமும் அற. இம்மையில் வர சந்தான சௌபாகிய சம்பத்து, இம்மையில் வர சந்தான சௌபாகிய சம்பத்தொடு மறுமையில் நிரதிசய இன்பமும் தரும் கற்பகமே, இம்மையில் வர சந்தான சௌபாகிய சம்பத்தொடு மறுமையில் நிரதிசய இன்பமும் தரும் கற்பகமே கருணை கண்பாராய், திருமயிலை கற்பகமே 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 கண்பாராய், கண்பாராய் கற்பகமே கண்பாராய்.
I have to acknowledge people who have helped me with this presentation, Sujata Vijayaraghavan for the references that I have mentioned, Roja Kannan, Priya Murli and disciples for the clip of the dance, Sangeeta Kalanidhi Sanjay Subramaniam for the references of Arunachala Kavirayar's compositions on this temple, Sangeeta Kala Acharya S. Rajam for being Sangeeta Kala Acharya S. Rajam. There is no definition that I can say that this is why I am thanking him or that is why I am thanking him. Thank you S. Rajam sir for having been there. Karthik Bhatt for bringing me some of the latest references from Roja Muttaya Research Library, particularly the Tenampet Subraya Mudaliyar, Tandavaraya Mudaliyar compositions, and finally the Roja Muttaya Research Library, which has been doing a magnificent job of preserving some of our great literary past. And above all, Bharat Sundar for having come here and sung all the compositions to bring life to this presentation. Thank you very, very much for having been such a lovely audience. Thanks a lot.